Well, as one of those odd people that instead of kicking a football around, I was writing poetry and short stories and all sorts of things from about the age of 14, but you know, living in the hills of St. Thomas in Jamaica, sort of thing. I was just doing this with no idea what would happen to it, but as the years ticked by, I became more and more interested in wanting to write. I was a ferocious reader, you know, read Scott and Dickens and the Brontes and so on. And some of those books really were prescribed books for what was then called the Jamaica Local Examination. If you wanted to go anywhere to get a sort of job you want, and I wanted to teach, you had to take the Jamaica Local Examination in those days. So, you know, but the thing is, the books that we had in schools then, I was shocked when I came here to find that a book like Jane Eyre, which, you know, I don't know how many times I've read Jane Eyre, but not just, I think, 95 pages in the abridged version that we had. It was a book well over 200 pages, you know, and so on. So it was for Tales of Two Cities and so on. And Ivanhoe, another of my favorite. So I was sort of an oddball. I played cricket with everybody else, but you know, my hobby when I'm alone and so on was writing. God knows the people I used to show them to, including my teachers, they must, you know, say, "Oh my God, what are we going to do with him?" But I still keep on. Yes, it's a bug, and once you've got bitten by the writing bug, or whether you become a famous writer or whatever, you never get healed. You just, you know, you just keep on doing it. So coming up on the boat, the SS Ariga, to join my mother and father in 1955, I was, 21. As soon as I got on the boat and I looked at the other 1,100 people, I thought, yes, there's a novel here. I didn't start it, but you know, it died a death after a couple of years and so on. It was all right to have them on the boat and the conversations they were having and so on. But what I think bothered me is that once everybody had dispersed and you've never seen them again, except for one lad. He was younger than me. I was 21. He was mid-teens, I think. We still are touched his years later. But, you know, it was, I realize now that imagination, which is a thing that a writer has got to have, had to kick in and be matured to sort of move on. So, you know, I move on to other things, but there we are. The Ariga was, and a lot of the other ships of the line from the Grimaldi Ciosa company, they were the people who really brought thousands of people from the Caribbean here. The Ariga was really bringing Caribbean people up. We left Jamaica, went to St. Kitts, and then down the spine of the West Indies to Barbados. And from Barbados, we turned out into the Atlantic. Now, I don't want to step on anybody's toe, but this wasn't the voyage of the Windrush, the captain of the Windrush, offered cheap fares in Jamaica. And if you look at a map of the West Indies, Jamaica is way up north, next to Cuba and Haiti. That's where we are, not from what we call, it's not derogatory, but it's just to the lesser Antilles. So the various accents on the Ariga, and also how people were forming into little groups. You know, they were probably seeing a Jamaican for the first time. I was seeing an Antiguan for the first time, and so and we were very sort of wary of each other. It doesn't matter now. One of my grandsons is ancestral go back to Trinidad, and you know, I am from Jamaica and so on. But these are things that people never really talk about. In my book, Mother Country, I tried to bring in all these people, but I was restricted to the fact that each colony has a different, and it's a language really, the things that they'd say and the things that they do and so on. And if you don't know it, you can't maintain a character speaking Trinidadian for long, or Guyanese, which is not in the Caribbean, but we generally consider Guyana as part of the Caribbean, which is not. Geographically, it's not. And Barbados and so on. And you know, you understand what each other is saying. It wasn't that far. But to try to speak as a Barbadian, you know, it was quite difficult to sort of maintain a dialogue. And even in Mother Country, I tried not to even attempt that because I couldn't do that very well, you know, just as I suppose a Barbadian writer would not be very good at the Jamaican accent, especially Jamaican patois. Yeah. But it was a wonderful thing. I think somewhere I've listed about 8 of the Grimaldi Siosa line ships. And by the end of the 50s, the beginning of the 60s, their advertisement in the West Indian Gazette was saying that they were providing a bridge between the Caribbean and Britain, some bridge over 5,000 miles long, you know. But also there were lots of humor and the rows between them. It was beautiful. A clever writer would make really a good novel out of it, but not many people, many of the writers I know have had that experience, because people like Selvin, Salke, Carew, so they perhaps not Selvin, they belong to what we would call the sort of Jamaican middle class, sort of, you know, and they wouldn't have had this experience. I don't think anybody has written, oh yes, there is, because they know not. But again, it was a book written by another Jamaican. There's so much story out there, and those of us who made the journey in those days, up to, say, the middle 60s, we were getting old and forgetting things and so on. So the main thing behind writing Mother Country, I had to get it down, you know, before I really was past it. And I think most of these things certainly is a book that you don't hear a lot of because they know not. It was published about 1957. I think I remember the author's name in a moment. And he told this marvelous, which is also typical of Brixton and other going from street to street trying to find a room. And everywhere he went, the landlady, always a landlady, there was simply a landlord, would say, I would rent you a room right now, but I have some boys here, and some of them are from Ireland, some from Scotland. They really wouldn't like it, and I don't want to upset them. It's not me, it's them. You know? And after he had been through so many streets, he said, right, I think I've got it now. I'm no longer looking for a room to rent. You know, I'm looking for the neighbors who didn't like a black man moving into this room. And once I find that neighbor, I can sit down with that neighbor and talk to that neighbor, and he will think of me as a, reasonably sensible man, and I might be able to get a room. So, but it's great. You don't really the newer people who are writing don't write about those things because it wasn't their experience. So I'm busy putting down my experience before I really pass it. It might not be great literature, but I think it's useful if someone is trying to work out the Caribbean movement from the Caribbean through to doing.
Absolutely. But I imagine that experience, which you inferred that this was a shared experience if you're trying to find an apartment in Brixton. And I would assume that this was quite contrasting with how you felt, particularly about how the advertising of being a bridge over to the mother country and that sort of thing. That must have come as quite a shock, I imagine. Had you anticipated any of that, or what was it that you thought that was kind of, what did that bridge that had been advertised represent to you before you got that?
But the thing is that the Grimaldi Ciosa line wasn't a British line. I'm sure British entrepreneurs were in it too, but it was mainly, I think, it was either an Italian or a Spanish company. So they were doing it for their own purposes, building the bridge across. They never really said what would happen when you get off the bridge this side of the Atlantic, what it would be, and I don't think they had any experience. But there were, the Grimaldi Ciosa line worked, they advertised regularly in the West Indian Gazette, which is another story, which is the paper that the great Claudia Jones founded. And for a time, certainly, it was the paper that really spoke up for West Indians, wherever they were. So, and also Grimaldi Ciosa, when Claudia started, not the Notting Hill Carnival, please. People are always saying that Claudia Jones started the Notting Hill Carnival. She did not. By the time the Notting Hill Carnival got into its stride, you're talking about the early 70s, early to mid 70s. Claudia had the 6 carnivals that she held, were really from 1959 to 64, the year of her death. It's quite possible, because these were complete sellout, that they might have inspired the people to start up the Notting Hill Carnival. But by that time, dear old Claudia died, and her ashes was next to Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery. And I have been to meetings where I've seen people have laid into this lady. Claudia never said the Notting Hill Carnival. It did not exist in her time. But the events in Notting Hill in 1959 was instrumental in starting the carnivals that we had in. I said we because I started working with Claudia as wanting to write, and getting into our office and telling her that I want to write. And she said, well, go, bring me a story. And I brought her a story. She never published it. But from that day until her death, my name was on the newspaper and I was filing copies and so on. So I'm very, I don't think it's up to me to sort of protect Claudia, but just to explain to people that Claudia Jones did not start the Notting Hill Carnival, but what she did, because what she wanted, I was in the room when she said it, it was a room about this size and we were really packed. She had a way of really getting people in. I remember sitting on the floor and there were loads of people behind me. And Claudia said, let's have something. We should get this taste of Notting Hill, the riots, out of our mouths, And nobody seemed to say anything then. A voice, I think it's a Trinidadian woman's voice, said, oh, let's have a carnival. And everybody just laughed and we laughed and we laughed. I mean, this was in November '58. The winter was coming on. And to get so many people out on the road doing a carnival march in the height of a British winter, I think was, And then Claudia said, but do we have to have it on the road? She was born in Trinidad too, but she left Trinidad at a very early age. 8, I think, went to the United States, never went back. So her personal experience of a Trinidad carnival was quite limited, really. They said, what about, And we agreed, and a lot of would-be, and some succeeded, actors, singers, and so on, gave, their talents to producing this and so on. And we've got that going. So the first 10 years I spent in this country was really quite exciting to me as somebody who wanted to write, and have the wider experience of things. I also wanted to study. I had this great idea that I was coming up to London and within 5 years I would have had a degree and I would be back home. Same to say, it took me about 40 years to get that degree because it's not something that I was, every now and again I sort of remembered and then I would start a course and that sort of thing. And, So, so many things were happening, you just won't do. And there were books being written about West Indian migration. Some excellent books being written over time. I think there's one, an English journalist, and she wrote, quite simply, the title was They Seek a Living. Marvelous book about going to the Caribbean and getting in a boat and going from island to island with these people, talking to them and seeing and them to come out. Marvelous. I can't think of her name at the moment. She used to work for the News Chronicle, I think. So if you want, she was slightly on the left of the other papers that were, put them on a boat and send them back home, that sort of attitude. But those were days, it was sort of, I think, almost defining moments of what is going to happen to the great British Empire of the time. And I'm worried that there's so few of us left who were around at the time and had the experience, and yeah, to write about our sojourn in the mother country.
You mentioned Claudia Jones. How did you meet her originally?
I never heard of her, but I was a bus conductor, so my first job, and perhaps we talk about getting that job. Can't remember. It was along this road, so it had to be either a 95 or a 109 along. And Theo Campbell was an ex-RAF man, and he owned a record shop at 250 Brixton Road. And everybody knew Theo because we all descended on Theo for our record for Saturday Night Blues, or even just for our own recreation. We all knew Theo, and Theo came on and he had a bunch of papers over his arm, and he said, "Would you buy one of these?" So I looked at it as a West Indian Gazette. I said, "Of course I will, but Theo, I'd like to write for it." And he said, "When you're next off or you have the time, why don't you come down to the shop? The West Indian Gazette is above my shop, so I'll take you up and introduce you to Miss Jones." So I did that. Couldn't wait for my next, I don't know if it was my late turn or a day off and going down there. And she met me, Claudia, Theo introduced us and said, he wants to write. And she got out of her chair and came around to me and I said, "So you want to write?" I said, "Yes." And we started talking, and Theo disappeared, and we talked. And she said, "I tell you what, this is a new paper, and they only had about 2 issues out." Said, "So why don't you go and do a story for me to see whether there are any support for this paper," and sort of thing. And I did my own poll walking from 250 Brixton Road into Brixton Market. But in those days it was strange that if you saw a black person coming towards you, if, when people like me, you see another black person coming, male or female, you could stop and have a chat. I wouldn't dare to do that now. Just imagine, I wouldn't do that now. But you stop, and I stopped so many people up to Brixton Market, and I did my own poll, and in a way, people say, "Yes, you would like to." I mean, the usual thing. You only would see black photograph in the national papers, of course. If the American superstars had come over for concerts and engagements and so on, yes. Otherwise, neighbors complaining about noisy parties and that sort of thing, and so yes, we would like to see something that sort of talk about us the way we were. And I took it back to her, and she read it, and she said to me, "You can write." She never published it. I often wondered what happened to it, and I would hate to see it now, but and from then, what was it, July? I think it was either June or July, 58. I was with the paper until the death of Claudia, and one of her colleagues tried desperately to keep it going, but couldn't get the support. I was still with the paper, but and it died because we just couldn't get the support of sort of people who would give Claudia the time. A lot of people were probably there because they knew of Claudia from she was in the States and what happened to her there and then, and the fact that she was deported. That in itself is a story, because she left Trinidad when she was 8, and by the time to be deported, she was something like about 38 or something like that. And the Americans, oh, you're from Trinidad, we're about to deport her to Trinidad. And one just assumed that the British government panicked, because they must have thought, well, it's better to have her here than to have her stirring up trouble in the West Indies when up to that time Britain wasn't sure what was going to happen to our West Indian colonies. And someone might say, have you got evidence of that? I haven't got any evidence of that conversation taking place. But a couple of years later, when Claudia applied for a British passport, what was that, 57? Quite some time. She hadn't heard about it. And because she was left-wing. I mean, in America, she was a communist. I don't think she had very much to do with the Communist Party here. I don't think the Communist Party here felt that they could cope with a black woman who was also an intellectual. They couldn't cope with that. So, you know, she you know, there were contacts, but there definitely were nothing. That they've treated a lot of the Americans, white Americans who came over, well, jobs, place to live, and so on. Claudia, they weren't quite sure what to do with her, so, you know, but she had a lot of friends in the Labour Party. And I remember, I have the letter in what I've managed to save from the West Indian Gazette papers. I think she spoke to Dinglefoot, Michael Foot's brother, about it, and he wrote to the colonial secretary about her waiting for such a long time for her passport. And back came a letter saying, Claudia, they didn't say this, Claudia, who left Trinidad when she was 8 and went to America and spent must be 30-odd years in America. The British colonial secretary must have known that. He sent her application to the governor of Trinidad, who probably had never heard of Claudia Jones, and said, do you think this person should get a British passport? And after a while, back came the answer, no. She did get her passport after all, because there were lots of people who were helping her, in, you know, and they probably realized that what Claudia was doing at 250 Brixton Road with the Gazette wasn't anything that was going to topple the Great British State or anything like that. They gave it to her. So, you know, there are all these stories there, which, you know, I think they're just going to disappear. And in 20 years' time, one would know sort of things that were happening. Mind you, I hadn't given up my job. And perhaps this is one of the things why Claudia rather liked someone like me, because I was not an expense on the paper. I wasn't paid for anything I'd written or anything that I'd done for the paper. I still worked as a bus conductor, make sure that my rent was paid, and you know, I was fairly well shod. But you know, while a lot of my other age group were quite good writers, no doubt about that, some branch off into academia, that sort of thing. Uh, I think they felt that, and rightly, that they should be paid for things, but there was no money in the Gazette. It wasn't making any money at all, you know. And it was, for instance, during the Notting Hill rise, the month of the rise, when everybody was talking about it, we were able to sell something like about 20,000 copies. It was a monthly. And after things started sort of calming down, you know, and as one young lady said to me, you know, in terms of, for instance, when you got on a bus and you went and sat next to someone, suddenly no longer was the person sort of getting up and saying, "Excuse me," and go and sit in another seat. That sort of that calmed down. Yes, it was as bad as that. You know, you go and you sit next to someone. It's, you know, those of us who work on the buses, we've seen it. So, you know, there's a young woman sitting next to the window on the bus, and a black man knew to come in, and, you know, I'm just got a couple of stops, so sit here. And so she looked and she saw who was sitting next to her, and she just jumped up, "Excuse me," and went and sit on a seat. And I remember there, as a personal experience, there was a very large man sitting in the seat and not very much left. And she would just go and sort of sit there, and she felt much safer that way. You know, we've come through a lot of things. That sort of thing wouldn't happen. I don't think it happens these days. But you tell people about it, "Oh, now that is told stories, those things never happen." But, I enjoyed that, and that's why, perhaps one of the reasons why, though Lanzo is not me, I have shouted and people say it's not me. But one of the things that I think I was competent in doing is to see things from the eyes, through the eyes of a bus conductor. So I made him a bus conductor so he could see that while his friend wouldn't see as much in the job that he had, sort of thing. You know, but it's you know, it's my living at Geneva Road was not really what it sounds like. My parents were living in Southwark, and they had a one-room flat, council flat, and they were told, "Look, it's a room for a husband and wife, nobody else." You know, is that clearly understood and that sort of thing? And so, yes. But I came up, and my mother told me, it's not that we were going to have a party or anything, but a couple of our friends were living in Geneva Road, and I was registered as living there. And probably that's why London Transport, when I went for the job as a bus conductor, directed me to Brixton Garage because my address was Brixton. But in fact, when I finished working at Brixton Garage well past midnight, I had to get the night bus and make my way home to Blackfriars, very close to Blackfriars Bridge, sort of thing, you know. So because I was registered at Geneva Road, I had to go to the Labour Exchange, which was in Coldharbour Lane, as you came out of Geneva Road and looked slightly across the road to your left as you come out. There was the famous, Labour Exchange. And I think I probably started something there because my mother directed me where to go. And I went to this Labour Exchange. So I had a reference from previous headmaster, I think one from the Baptist pastor. And I also had my third year Jamaica local examination, which was not just simply a piece of paper. If you wanted to teach, you could, under supervision from the trained teachers, and you were called a probationary teacher, and you hoping that you would pass a teacher's examination within a given time. If you didn't, then you're out, and so on. Well, I didn't do any of that. I only had my certificate, must be a couple of years before I came up. So I thought, well, if you're going for a job, the best thing is to show it to the clerk. And she said, what's this? So I said, it's just as it says, third year Jamaica local examination, pass. You only get it if you pass. And she took it to, I suppose, our senior officers in the back. And they read it. And after a while, they came back to me and they thought, oh, well, it is genuine. There is such a thing. They must have, I am assuming, I have no evidence that they might have phoned the education department, which of course ran the Jamaica education system, to see if there's such a thing, And and with that, then probably I could add and subtract money from a pound if you are going to be a bus conductor. So I used that in the writer's poem. I sort of changed around a bit to make it, sort of slightly different from what I actually encountered. And from there, I was sent to be a bus conductor, tested at Camberwell, and then on to somewhere Marylebone, and then to Chiswick and train. And never been trained for almost anything else, really. My later jobs, they looked at my certificates, and that is it. Either got it or not. So those were days, and these are the experiences of people who were coming to England, who in fact came in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and so on. Yes, I remember the fares went out. It's one of those things that London Transport was slow in doing, in printing out what the new fares would be. I don't know if this is your experience, but in the old buses, real buses, these things now, I don't really take to them, just worlds apart. The buses of up to, I suppose, 10 years ago, you'd go on a bus, and at the back you could see the fares. There's a fare chart. You know where you've got on, you know where you're going, you could say it. And this gentleman asked me for a fare to a certain place. I can't remember exactly where. So I gave him the new fare, because what the garage did was to give each conductor the new fare chart, just a little one that you could keep with you in case passengers query anything, until they're able to have the bigger ones printed. And he said, no, conductor, you're wrong. I did this journey yesterday, and it was, and I said, I'm sorry, the fares went up yesterday to take effect this morning, and I'm afraid I'm obliged to charge you the new fares, or if an inspector gets on and was to see that I've charged yesterday's fare, I'm going to be reported, and that sort of thing. I said no. Well, I wouldn't ring the bell because I thought, here I'm going to have someone who hasn't paid his fare or the right fare. And in those days, inspectors, both uniformed inspectors and those not wearing uniform, would be on the bus, who you wouldn't know. And I don't know how long we were at the bus stop, perhaps only a couple of minutes, perhaps 3-4 minutes. People were getting anxious, and one gentleman said, look, as a rule, I don't interfere in other people's conversation, but this is beyond the conversation between you and the conductor. So, and it's affecting me, and I suppose the other passengers. So I have got to intervene. The conductor is right, and here's my fare. You see, I'm going to exactly where you're going to, and you see that the fare. And he took it from the man, and he looked at it. And then he looked at me, and he said, conductor, I am white. You are black, but I apologize. I've never had an apology like that before or since. It's incredible, the things that you could see that would happen. As in the bus garage at Brixton, the very large lady who was the cleaner, and she would go around, and that was when I just started. It was the week that I started out. And she said, you remind me of someone. So I said, yeah. Being rather, I suppose, childish, I named must be about 6 blacks, from Paul Robeson to Frank Worrell, the cricketer. And said, no, and she went on. And I would have forgotten it. My driver would have forgotten it, but she kept on coming up with this. You remind me of someone, I just can't remember. And after about a week of it, she came up and it is true. She came up to me and she said, I remember now. And I said, yes. She said, you remind me of that gollywog and Robertson strawberry jam. And I stood there for a very long time gazing. And I didn't say anything to her. But curiously, I loved Robertson strawberry jam. And I went home and I had, and I chucked it out. I couldn't stand. And no Robertson strawberry jam is when years later I got married. And my wife said to me, oh, come on. You can forgive Robertson strawberry jam. But those are the sort of things, that you came across. Or the youngsters on the buses. There's this lad, I don't know, perhaps 10, 11 or so. And he sat, and I went, it was on top, and went through any more fair speech. I was just about to start down the stairs. I thought, that lad hadn't paid. So I went to him and I said, you haven't paid, have you? He said, no, I haven't. So I said, aren't you going to pay? No. Well, why not? He looked at me. He said, I'm a miser. I said, well, even if misers decide to travel on a bus, I'm afraid that they have to pay. So your fault is being a miser. You shouldn't have come on a bus. So can I? And those were what? Tuppence for, you know. And he said, I suppose so. And it took forever to push his hand out of his pocket and to take out those tuppence. And I swear that he's probably one of the comedians that we do see on television, probably who have made it big and so on, but you should see. But, you know, you could go home and really, you know, that didn't bother me one little bit. The conversation I had with him is, you know, that was great. But there are so much things that one saw. But gradually, by the time I left the buses 9 years later, things had moved on. You know. And,
but I imagine that must have fueled your writing at the Gazette, did it? Having so much interaction with people.
oh yes. I think that's something that perhaps Claudia spotted. And working at the Gazette too, I met so many people. I met all the great West Indian writers, with the exception of Sir Vidya Naipaul. I don't think he ever turned up at the West Indian Gazette, obvious. But from, you know, Carew to Sam Selvin, George Lamming, you know, they were always there. They would just come and having a chat with Claudia, and, you know, I just sat in the corner and see what I could get from them, you know, and those people, they recognized me. I went to something that the Gazette had. They would say, "Oh, hi, Donald, what are you doing?" And that sort of thing. So, and that is a lot, you know. To be talking to Lamming, who is such a great wordsmith. You know, he's the one who most West Indians will sort of quote half of his sentence. My mother who fathered me. But Lamming said more than that, and it's really, I think it's beautiful. Lamming said, my father sowed the idea of me. It was my mother who fathered me. And I don't think a West Indian has written a more profound sentence than that. You know, or when I'm struggling to write and you can't get these, and you go back to Lamming again, and he said, you know, all writers are builders, working on the still unfinished edifice of the language. What a sentence! You know, what a thought! You know, and I thought, all right, George. So, you know, I'm not one of the architects and the master builders and so on. I'm probably the guy who carried the hot bricks up the ladder to those who were really building something, but at least you've included me in as part of the building team. So thank you very much for that. But, you know, and Carew is another one. He died a couple of years ago. who said to me, Claudia must have seen something in me that I perhaps didn't even see in myself. Well, 1959, and she said, how is your passport? I said, oh, just came up a few years ago, my passport is okay. She said, good, because you're going to Vienna. I said, pardon? She said, you're going to the 7th World Festival of Youths and Students. I couldn't believe it. But of course, I've never heard of the 6th festival, much the 7th, which was being planned in Vienna, which was heavily subsidized by the Soviet Union. I'm one of those who missed the Cold War. There's so many things going on the other side that you could go, you know. And so for long I was attached to the West Indian Students' Union, which is something, again, that people have forgotten, how our students, with their head office at number 1 Collingham Gardens, it was really open to people to come in, and we could go and listen to talks, you know, things were happening and so on. Though, in fact, probably some of the students there, that might be the last time we ever had a sort of meeting together, because we go back to Jamaica or wherever, they are up there, and, you know, and we are just the people at the bottom. But I was attached to them and went to Vienna. And I think the 2 countries I spotted and didn't have a delegation was the Republic of Ireland and the United States. But the United States might as well have sent their own contingent, because at every corner there was a booth where there were United States people calling us in and saying, but don't you see that this is a great propaganda thing? You know, at one time I just got angry. I said, look, you put this on, this is the 7th, you put the 8th on in the States, but I want it in the southern states. I don't want it in New York. I want it in the southern states, and you have to guarantee my my safety. He looked at me as he said, I've got a proper one here. And they gave me a book. It's a book written by Milovan Delius, who was one of, who was the dictator of Yugoslavia. Tito. Yeah. It was one of Tito's right-hand men, and then he broke away, was put in prison, and claimed that he wrote this book using a pencil and toilet paper, because he wouldn't be given paper to write on. So I got to Milovan Delius going to the toilet, and reams of these are coming back to write this book. You know, I brought it every now and again when I feel nostalgic. I pull it out. I said, I didn't promise I would read it. I got to about page 10, couldn't go any further. I just wanted to write, not just to see my name on the paper, but also there were, I don't think newspapers are really, the purpose is just the great big issues of the day. I'm one of those who sort of got very angry with the British press when, if a black person did something, they would be written up large and often misquoted in the papers. I quickly gravitated to papers like the News Chronicle, which I read for about a year. I mean, and when it was taken over by the Mail, I switched to the Guardian, and have been with the Guardian ever since. I've even had an article in the Guardian. It's something in the days before. There are quite a few black writers in the Guardian now, but this was probably when they were at school. So, but it's the stories and the things that were happening to people. There are letters where people wrote to Claudia because they didn't know anyone else that they could go to with this complaint. Someone. So it was really, it was more than your daily newspaper. It wasn't the Mirror or the Sketch. Yeah, such a paper. But it brought also news from the various islands, someone. And it wasn't just West Indian, so there were, it was at the time when the West African states in particular were about to get their independence, the Gold Coast becoming Ghana, Nigeria, and so on. Perhaps it's best to tell you what really happened. This, again, was pretty early, must have been in 1959 probably. I went down to the Gazette, which how I used to work. If I was on late, about 10, 11 o'clock, I'd go down to the Gazette's office to see if Claudia wanted me to do anything, and or in fact to give me a story or something. And she said, what I used to do to make things easier for myself, I'll probably wear the conductor's uniform so you could see the line going down in black trousers, and you would know that he works at the bus. But I would have, all of my own jacket out, so I wasn't easily spotted as being a conductor. She said, "Oh, good. Come with me." Now, Claudia was very American, whatever the Americans want to say, very American. She never went anywhere unless it was by cab, taxis, and she called a cab. And we got in. I said, "Where are we going?" She said, "You will find out, never mind." And we were talking, and I remember going over Vauxhall Bridge, heading into Victoria, and I can't tell where else we went from there. But before long, we were going up these red carpeted floor of it's a government office, can't remember the name. And we went in, and it was the Nigerian renewed independence conference. So they must have broken it off or something, and it was, and all these people, Chief Awolowo, and lots of other Nigerian politicians who were the people at that time, who were long since dead, so on. I said, God, I'm at a conference for the Nigerian renewed independence. So I went in, she said, "Go in." So I went in the seat before Claudia, and I just sat down. And it did cross my mind that Claudia was quite a tall lady. we are sort of eye level now. Never mind. And then the speeches started, and I saw Claudia and everybody else had sheafs of paper on their knees, and when somebody corrected something in his speech and so on, they would write it in and so on. So I couldn't bear it anymore because I didn't have it. I went over to Claudia and I said, I haven't got any of those papers. Where did you people get them from? I didn't see you collecting any. And she leaned over to me and said, darling, you're sitting on them. I suddenly realized that was my first press conference. Can you? Yeah. So it's I've always she was that the great communist that everybody seems to be afraid of was someone who could just have you in stitches laughing and that sort of thing. She would. But so it was this. It took care of most of the Nigerians who would have been in London at the time, what they would get from some of the papers. You'd have to go to the heavies, from the Guardian, the News Chronicle upwards, to find mention of these things. So it was that sort of paper. And also, she had columns of advertisement where people could advertise their, what they had to sell and that sort of thing. So it did serve its purpose, but because it was not their main paper, they would be getting the West Indian Gazette, but they would still go out and buy their Daily Sketch, Daily Mirror, or whatever other paper, where it was useful to hear the voice from home and to hear what was being said. And also it was important that some people like Norman Manley, when you say Manley, everybody think of Michael. Michael was his son, who, of course, was Prime Minister of Jamaica for about more than 6 years, I think. Norman was one of those who led the fight for independence, and he was chief minister. These terms of Britain. So he was never prime minister, he was chief minister. Then there was independence, and from independence on prime minister. But people like Norman Manley coming to Britain in the wake of the Notting Hill riots did end up in the West Indian Gazette's office to talk to Claudia. I think Grantley Adams also. We did go to meet Williams, but he didn't come to the West Indian Gazette office. They went, I don't know, perhaps the Trinidad Commission, where they had their discussion and so on. So, and there were lots of African leaders, and particularly one or two of the South African leaders who had to flee during apartheid. They also came to the West Indian Gazette. They had stories. So a complete set of the West Indian Gazette, which nobody seems to have, a few missing, gives not only what it was like to be a West Indian in Britain, but also black. So it wasn't surprising that after a while it was changed. The paper was changed from the West Indian Gazette to India and Caribbean, and some sub-editing, so that inclusive of the other people.
It sounds like such an exciting place to be, that office at 205.
Yes, yes. 250.
Can you give us a sense sense of, because you've told us a lot about people who were there, people who didn't show up, and like I have this image in my mind of Claudia constantly on the phone or having meetings with people and people coming in and out. But is that right? Is that accurate? Can you give us a sense of what it was like? What did it smell like? What would we have seen if we'd gone in there?
I have letters in some of the papers I've got where people from, MPs say, Claudia, why don't you come up on so that day we can also come and have tea. So, by and large, they were mainly Labour members and on the left. But there was one Tory MP who always come to our staff, very nice. At one time, when I heard that he was going to be deselected, I thought, is it because he's mixing with the wrong people? But he wasn't deselected. He was just a very nice guy. Right, let's see. I go this way. Again, coming down to see Claudia one day, and she said, I want you to go and interview James Baldwin. I said, the James Baldwin who has just published, Another Country? He said, yes, you're going to interview him. So I went to interview Baldwin. What a man, And I think the interview ran over, as you can tell from I talk too much. He turned to one of the people with him and said, can you go downstairs, see if you meet, if Bill is there, and tell him to come straight up, not to hang on down in the lobby. So after this man went down, I turned to him, I said, is that Bill, as in Bill Weatherby? He said, yes. I thought, I've got to meet this guy, because he was writing for The Guardian, but he covered most of the civil rights stuff for The Guardian. I don't know how many times he's been beaten up, too close to the niggers, beaten up, and so on. I thought, I've got to meet this guy. And I sort of carry on a bit until Bill came up, and so on. And we decided that, Bill said, I would like to come and talk to Claudia. So can I meet you in Brixton, and then we can do the round in Brixton? I said, oh, yes. But I got it wrong. I was on afternoon shift, but it was so early that by the time Bill got there was no time really to take him around and so on. I know he went up to Claudia and he was chatting to Claudia before I got there. And some people say, it's all right. When we finish here, I'll have a bit of wonder about, So he wondered about, and he ended up in Clapham. And Bill found an advertisement in the window which says, no blacks, no Irish, no Welsh. Now, I've never seen no dogs. Everybody has jumped on the no dogs over the last 10 years. But if you go back in the papers, you don't find no dogs, because the British are dog lovers. And I cannot imagine, I don't know, people put the no dogs there because that is associating you with dogs. But with Bill, he found no Welsh. It's probably that this man had a fallout with his Welsh girlfriend or his Welsh landlord or whatever. So therefore, he was not going to have a Welsh person living in his house. No blacks, no Irish, no Welsh. So a great swathe of the British Empire, if you want, he's dismissing. But I don't know of anybody else who have found, perhaps somebody will tell me that there was one that says no Scots. I don't know. I have never seen that. But, we found all sort of thing in the Gazette's office.
It's amazing. Sounds like such a... I would just love to be able to visit it now. Do you miss it?
I miss it, and as you... people of my age so used to envy me because when we had the carnivals and you used to choose a beauty queen, my job was to take them for dinner and interview them. Oh, it's a terrible job, but somebody had to do it. So, but it could have grown. Claudia also had the experience of the Black American papers when she was there, and she was also a journalist. No, she came through the Communist Party in the 30s. And she was a teenager, I think that's the first time she... because it was to do with the... I think somebody made a play of it. I didn't see the play. But the Scottsboro Boys, which... I think they've also made a film of it too. And she went there. She was brought up as a Catholic. Went to a priest, and the priest said, "My dear girl, all this is God's will." And she wasn't satisfied, so she went to the Communist Party. And he said, "No, I don't think it's God's will either." So she stuck with that. And she rose rapidly through the ranks of their publication, their Women's Journal, and so on, I think by the time she was thrown out of America, she was editing, I think, about 3 of their journals. So she was fully trained. And it was about that time also when the FBI swooped down, and about 16 of them, and they were being tried for un-American activities, I suppose. She, white and black, this was not just blacks who were caught in the net. And she was their official spokeswoman. And, so she was quite an elegant person. How she, to get a picture of Claudia, if you think of how the black divas in America would have dressed round about the end of the 40s, the 50s, and so on, then you have an idea. She was elegantly dressed, marvelous in person. This year she would have been 100. This year, 2015, she would be 100. And they all have to go sometime. She died a couple of months short of her 50th birthday. But what she did in those days, this is something that I've been asking people about, because anything that even, say, academics wanted to know, they would head for the West Indian Gazette to Claudia Jones, This book, The Newcomers, I remember when, the lady who was doing the research, gosh, what's her name? I think of her name in a moment.
You were just about to say
Yeah.
with glass.
Yes, she made her way to the West Indian Gazette, talked to Claudia, and in her book there are bits on Claudia, and she coined the phrase newcomers. And if anybody asked me, if you was to read a book to see statistics and so on, because it was written by an academic and she would tell you how many blacks were in one borough or the other and so on. There was, so Ruth's glass is someone. Sheila, no, Sheila Delaney is the writer, isn't she? Not her. Another academic who came to interview her when and her book was Dark Strangers. And that is following people on a trip from the West Indies and into the factories where they work and so on and produce them. So all those books, they would head straight for them. I don't know, there are black papers being published in this country, but I don't know if these academics would see them as somebody, I must see this person because they will have something to say. I don't know if it happens. I haven't seen it in the papers that I read. But, so Claudia wasn't just a troublemaker, as, when the colonial secretary, I remember his name now, Lennox Boyd, sent her application for a British passport to the governor of Trinidad. I don't know who was the governor of Trinidad at the time. So, it's, I suppose, once you were sort of tinged with the fact that you were a communist, I suppose, that follows you around. I say that she sent me to Vienna, and I remember going to the Ranaka Theatre, and there was a ballet there. And about 3 years ago, I read somewhere that the great Russian ballet dancer, Rudolf Nureyev, as a young man, was there. And I said, did I actually see a very young Rudolf Nureyev dancing in that ballet? I don't know. It's not important, but I probably got sent further than most people. People like my pal Ken, who died years ago. He used to write for the Gazette too, but he refused to take a job as I would, my conductor's job, to make sure that I could pay my rent and I could keep myself, as someone in early 20s would feel that they would like to. But so I have a feeling that some of the others probably might have been cost on the Gazette's rather poor funds, but I wasn't, because the Gazette couldn't have afforded to pay my expenses to pay, and I had to chip in with the rest. But I loved the excitement of it, you know, and so this is it. But I never actually, as I began to say, never actually lived at Geneva Road, but officially that's where I was. And, you know, one could see, and my first image of Geneva Road is turning into Geneva Road to go to where my mother's friends were living, taking a message or whatever there. And I'd never seen this before. And there was a funeral cortege, and you have to really think back, you can't, to 1955, you can't. And to see how people actually stood still on the pavement with men taking off their caps or their hats to watch this cortege pass. You know, this is something I had no experience of that. You know, to see. And these days, nobody would care. Oh, there's a hearse. You're busy doing your business. You know, you have no time for that. But how, whether he was someone they knew along the street or not, but everybody came to a stop. Men, their hats off, heads bowed. Fantastic.
How long did you live on Geneva? No, you never lived on Geneva Road, but how long were you registered there and living in Southwark? Sort of
Yeah,
in that kind of
yes. My parents had it sort of well planned because I came up August, in fact. Came up August 22nd, whenever that is. I must remember that's a birthday to celebrate. And by July of the following year, they had bought their house, not far from here, you know, Cronworth Gardens, which is, not Cronworth Gardens, Crochet Road, which has been demolished now and new flats have come up and so on. So I was there for somewhat, nearly a year, but perhaps not quite. But that caught up with me. And I think the tenants around there were quite reasonable because they knew me. And they would call, even after we moved from there, the 109 bus was still going down Blackfriars Road, and people would get on and would call me, you know, by my name, and how are you and how are your parents and that sort of thing, you know. So we probably just got landed. But what irritated me was to read something that the mayors of London had met. And one of the things that they were discussing was immigrants coming into their borough. And the mayor of Southwark said, we haven't got any in our borough. You know, well, I was reading a book years after it came out, sort of, and I said, that's not true, mate. At least I know 3 that were living in your borough. You know, so, but it worked. I always thought that I would like to just go back and see Ripley Building, see if it's still there. It's probably pulled down now, new buildings would be built.
But you'd be driving through Brixton on the bus, presumably. You're driving. Did you say you were driving?
No, I was a conductor.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's where the fun was.
But the bus that you were on, that was going down.
Yes, we'll be going down Blackfriars Road,
Right.
the 109 to cross Blackfriars Bridge, turn left into the embankment, and then would come down from Westminster down to Kennington. It was one of those odd routes that some devious mind in London Transport devised, because when I have my break, I could get on the next 109, but this time it would be going to Westminster, along the embankment, down Blackfriars Road, and rejoin the route again at the Oval here, at Kennington Oval. So, well, yes, Theo Campbell was well known. Also, he was an ex-RAF, and he owned the premises. And as you came in, there was a shop. And if you want to go to the West Indian Gazette, it's up the stairs, and even further up the stairs were a law firm. I don't think the lawyers were there, but they represented black, and they had some black law clerks there who would take you whatever you want to say, and then they would provide the lawyers who would defend you or argue your case or whatever. I found Brixton a lovely place to live in and to work in. On the buses, I talked to a lot of people. There's an old man, and you're talking the 1950s, and you're saying when he was a boy, and I reckon that for him to be a boy was probably in the 1870s, I would think. And he said he remembered as a boy watching sheep being driven on the verges, going to the meat market, Smithfield, where I suppose that's where they would be slaughtered, that they would come on down. Another day he was telling me that, the river Ephra is on here, but when Queen Elizabeth I visited Sir Walter Raleigh, you have Raleigh Gardens further up. I don't know whether Raleigh Gardens were the country seat of Sir Walter Raleigh, because in 15-something, Brixton was just a village, I should think. She came by boat from Vauxhall, small boat on the river Ephra, up to what we know now as Ephra Road, and then I suppose they would have continued on to Raleigh Gardens. But I don't know that Sir Walter Raleigh had a country house there, but he told me the story, and I thought it was a lovely story. And I'm passing it on. Somebody will say, no, Sir Walter Raleigh never lived in Brixton. And so, and then there's this cinema, which was the Pullman cinema, and I could tell the difference between winter and summer, because they would have, like now, they would say, it's cooler inside because it's the start of the summer, so you could go in. And when winter's coming on, because they would change the sign to say, it's warmer inside. And that's where you would see some, not main, the films that perhaps the bigger cinemas wouldn't show. I remember there was a French film, and I suppose like everybody else I was drawn to it because it was X certificate. So I went, and there were two lads in front of me. One was tall, could quite easily have been late teens, and one, nobody is going to convince me that he was much more than about 14, couldn't possibly be. And the older lad came through, and the lady said, right, you can go in. You look 18, so you can go in. When the little boy came in, he said, no, laddie, you can't go in. And he pushed his hand in his jacket, the inside of his jacket, and pulled out a certificate, slid it across, and this woman opened it up, did some calculations, said, all right, you're 18, you can go. But I feel up to this day it was the older boy's certificate. Yes, you know, I couldn't see for the life of me what was about the film, which was X-rated. Perhaps I dozed off. I don't know. You know. But again, standing outside the Prince of Wales and people saying, you know, I remember we couldn't go in there. No, you couldn't have a drink in the Prince of Wales. You know. So all this was sort of going on. But what was great about Brixton, and in my book, I was hoping people who have read it would have mentioned it to me about, you know, what they knew about Brixton Market or whatever. But nobody has mentioned it. All I get from people are a couple of the bedroom scenes, which I say, oh my God, why did I write that? Because that's all they know. That's all they remember about the book. I think it's worth more than that. You know? But going into Brixton Market and seeing some of the food stuff that you could get to buy in Coronation Market in Kingston and so on. And the chance that you would bump into someone you knew from back home, perhaps from your own village or, you know, somewhere close. So getting off and sort of wandering through Brixton Market was something to behold, you know. Meeting a woman, my mother's generation, in Brixton Market, and you know, she kept me talking a long time, because as I said, if you haven't seen anyone from your neck of the woods, you know, whoever they were, whether you knew them well, but she would know me as a boy going to school, and she was talking, and then, of course, she would have to tell me about the people who have died since she came up, and that sort of thing. It's just to find someone to talk to, because you could go into your room and it could become a very lonely place where, you know, you didn't have, you wish that you had somebody who would knock at your door and come in and talk to you. It could be a very lonely life. And in fact, Sam Selvon wrote a book, The Lonely Londoners. You know, so it's different. It was getting off at my stop to go to Ripley Buildings in Southwark. I was just sort of closing the door behind me on, you know, the people who would have a laugh and so on, and well, go home to my parents, and you know, and we sort of talk family matters and that sort of thing. But in Brixton, that was different. The conversations that you would have with people that you don't necessarily even want to meet again, but then, you know.
You seem to be really made up for that people would bump into one another. There was enough of that communal space for people to be able to have those interactions.
Yeah.
And I suppose those communal spaces are what was drawing people to Brixton in the first place.
Yeah.
Because people used to go there to get their food and their clothing and all that sort of thing.
But another thing, at the West Indian Gazette, remember when the Taj Mahal opened in Brixton. It was the first Indian restaurant for miles around. And we would go there. You know you'd have a good meal, and you know that, of course, you know, people would be sort of waiting to say, well, when are they going to go? You know, they're driving my customers away. That would go there. The Gazette used to have, I think Claudia and Manchanda were the first people to take me to the Taj Mahal. And I remember after going to Vienna, where we met some Germans. Well, we were going to, we was to go to Russia. But the Russians said that they weren't taking anyone back to Russia, but we could go, would you believe it, to Kiev. And we thought, oh no, if we can't see Moscow or Leningrad as it was then, you know, we wouldn't. So the German said, we'll take you to East Germany. So I was pleased for that, because I'd love you to be there to take a picture of the American who were on duty when they saw this black guy coming from the wrong side of the wall. There wasn't a wall there yet. The wall came about 2 years after I left, after I've been there. What is he doing over there? You know, and I love sort of just teasing the Americans with this sort of thing. And I'm not, you know, I've been to America. I love America, but there are some of the things that I think, well, going back to the 50s, you know, I think that, you know, they really went over the top sometimes.
It's a very diplomatic way of putting it.
Yes, they do. Oh, well, you know, I have lots of friends, including my dear sister living there. So, you know, and I even have an American who runs a business, a ranch business. You can, if you want to be a cowboy, you can go there, spend a week on a ranch and that sort of thing. And she called me her dad across the water, and that's lovely, yeah, you know. So, you know, many times we've changed planes in America, either going to Jamaica or coming back, that sort of thing. But if you're looking back in time, there are some weird things that, you know, was happening at that time. One of the things I do not, as much as I would like, I do get invited to go and talk to people in the lower classes in schools, and it's fantastic because the questions they ask, the answers are, I mean, one young man sort of, you know, right up my street, he said, you know, the Jamaica that you left, I want to know they make cars that they would have on the road. You know, it said, you know, by the time I left, there were a lot of British cars being on the road. But I mean, in my boy, his age at school, they were all American cars, Pontiacs and Chevs and Nashes and, you know, Fords, of course, and that sort of thing. And he was fascinated. He wanted to know more. his mom wanted to drag it away. I said, I'm sure Mr. Hines wanted to go now. But, even that, and, which has nothing to do with people living and so on, but his interest in motor vehicles, want to know, what they would be like. Yes, I worry about it because there's things that happen. I just want my stuff. My wife is in. She would look, if she was here, she would say, "Oh yes, he's kept it. The problem is the room that he works in is so untidy that he wouldn't know where to find it." You could say, "Well, where's the evidence?" He has the evidence there, but he wouldn't know where to find it. That sort of thing. So perhaps that's my next thing, to sort out my papers and so on. So when there are no more storytellers around, people could have a look. See what's happening.
What is your office like at home? Is it a mass of papers and books and use of paper?
I haven't really got into the habit of saying, well, this ought to be filed somewhere. Somebody phoned me about Claudia Jones about 6 months ago and said, "Donald, I know you had a copy of what George Lamming said at Claudia's funeral. Can I have a copy?" I said, "Yes." I thought, I know I have it filed somewhere, but it's not really clearly marked. So well, I remember my daughter had come and said, "Dad, going in onto your computer. Look, I am going to create a file. All those old papers that you have written here, there, and everywhere, I'm going to put them on this, and I'm going to call them Dad's old file." I said, "All right." Didn't pay much attention. I don't know how long she spent trying to do it. So I thought, gosh, I must find this thing. But I remember it's on the computer, and I remember Jackie was tidying up my computer. So I went into Dad's old files. Right on the top was a letter that it was a letter, it's a speech that George Lamming gave, which is it's less than a foolscap, double spaced, but he's such a wonderful wordsmith that it's great just to read it again, and there it was. So it's really to find all the stuff. They aren't lost, they're there, but they're temporarily lost from the fact that I couldn't put my hands on them, but they're there. And one day, to my great consummation and also pleasure, the novel I was writing when I left Jamaica. Remember Carew said, "Why did you want to do anything like that?" Because what I'd planned is a sort of it's a slavery story. So it was mainly 18th century. So you were taking on a novel. You're going to write a novel based in the 18th century. I said, yeah. Well, he did ask me what else I was doing, and I said, and I started making it out, about somebody coming to London, and settling in and so on. I said, "Oh, that's much better. That's the sort of thing, And years later, I've read where James Baldwin went to see, who was the black writer before James Baldwin? Can't think of it. And he asked James Baldwin what he was doing. And James Baldwin said he started making up a story. He said, oh, that's good. Continue with it. You know, and he said on the subway going home, he said, oh, I think I must do it. And I think that ended up being Go Tell It on the Mountain, his first novel. It's a fantastic novel. But mine didn't turn out to be anything like that. But, you know.